Rhinon wiped a smear of grease across his forehead, making it look like he was attempting some kind of interstellar war paint. The reactor room of Litho City was as welcoming as a tax audit, and twice as complicated. Pipes crisscrossed overhead like a drunk spider's web, and the air was thick with the kind of humidity that made you feel like you were swimming through it. "Pass me the spanner, Grix," he said, holding out a hand without looking. "What am I, your assistant?" Grix replied, already tossing the tool with just enough force to be annoying. It clattered against a pipe, bounced, and Rhinon snatched it from midair with the kind of reflexes you only get from dodging creditors and ex-girlfriends. "You're whatever I need you to be when I'm neck-deep in a reactor that's older than my grandma's secrets," Rhinon muttered. He tightened a bolt with a grunt. This particular piece of junk had been threatening to give up the ghost for the past year. They'd been coaxing it back to life with the engineering equivalent of sweet nothings and increasingly creative profanity. Grix leaned back against a wall, arms crossed. His leather jacket creaked in protest, the kind of jacket that made you look halfway dangerous, like you might know where to find a black market energy cell or two. "So, what's the plan, genius?" Rhinon squinted at one of the control panels, its display flickering ominously. "The plan, my dear Grix, is to keep this thing from blowing us to tiny, bite-sized bits until I can figure out what the hell's causing these power surges. And here I was hoping for a nice, quiet day of not getting killed." Grix sniffed, feigning disappointment. The reactor, as if sensing the sarcasm in the air, chose that moment to belch out a cloud of smoke. Rhinon coughed violently, waving away the acrid fumes. "Great. Just great, add that to the list of things that want me dead." "It's a long list," Grix said, casually checking his nails. "Too bad you're such a lovable guy." Rhinon rolled his eyes. "Yeah, I'm the poster boy for charm. Keeps the assassins on their toes." He popped open a panel, the squeal of metal on metal echoing through the room. "This city's falling apart faster than my last relationship. And just like that, the more I try to fix it, the worse it gets. Funny, I thought your last relationship ended because of your charming personality," Grix said, leaning in for a closer look. "What the hell is that?" Rhinon frowned at the tangle of wires and circuits that looked more like a rat's nest than anything belonging in a reactor. "That, my friend, is what happens when you let amateurs tinker with things they shouldn't." He jabbed a finger at a particularly charred section. "This shouldn't even be here, or maybe they left it as a surprise. You know, a little gift for the next unlucky bastard to open this thing up," Grix suggested. "If it's a gift, then it's from someone who hates me. You do have that effect on people." Before Rhinon could retort, the entire room shuddered. A low hum filled the space, vibrating through the soles of their boots. "What the hell now?" Grix's bravado vanished, replaced by a look that was part curiosity, part concern. Rhinon's fingers danced over the controls, eyes darting over the readouts. "Power spike. Big one. We're talking by your own coffin levels. It's always the way, isn't it? Just when you think things can't get worse, the multiverse decides to slap you upside the head. It's like it's daring us to fix it," Rhinon muttered. He tapped a few more buttons, trying to stabilize the reactor. The whole system was as delicate as a peace treaty, and twice as likely to blow up in your face. "I'd rather it didn't dare us at all," Grix replied, eyes glued to the flickering lights. "In fact, I'd prefer it if it left us alone entirely." "Ah, but then we wouldn't have any fun, would we?" Rhinon's grin was all teeth, the kind of grin you get when you know you're about to do something incredibly stupid. The room shook again, this time more violently. A sound like tearing fabric echoed through the space, and both men staggered, grabbing onto whatever they could to stay upright. "Okay, that's new," Grix shouted over the din. "What's happening?" Rhinon stared at the reactor, which now seemed to be pulsing with an eerie, unstable glow. "I think we've got ourselves a little rift in the multiverse." "A rift? In the multiverse," Grix repeated, as if tasting the words. "Oh, that's just perfect. Next thing you know, we'll have little green men popping out asking for directions, or a cosmic horror looking to redecorate," Rhinon added, more focused on the controls than Grix's sarcasm. "Always wanted to meet one of those," Grix said, totally unconvincing. His eyes darted around, as if expecting something monstrous to manifest right in front of him. "Look, just keep an eye on those readings, will you? We need to know if it's going to stabilize, or if we should start running like hell." "Running sounds good to me." "Running sounds very good," Grix said, his fingers working the console in an attempt to make sense of the chaos. They both knew the score. Lithos was teetering on the edge, and all it would take was one wrong move to send them hurtling into oblivion. Small wonder then that as the ground continued to tremble and the reactor spat more sparks into the air, their humor turned blacker by the second. "You ever get the feeling," Rhinon said, pulling himself upright as the shaking subsided, "that we're just the universe's way of having a laugh at itself?" "Absolutely. But I'm not laughing," Grix replied, his voice echoing across the room. The reactor's glow had dimmed slightly, but the air was still charged with energy, raising the hairs on their arms like the world's worst static shock. Whatever had caused the multiverse to hiccup wasn't through with them yet. Think we can fix it? Grix asked, his voice softer now, almost lost in the hum of the machinery. Fix it? Who said anything about fixing it? I'm just trying to make sure it doesn't fix us. Grix chuckled, a dry sound in the electric air. Right, survival first, heroics later, exactly. And if we don't survive, well, at least we won't have to explain it to anyone. Rhinan nodded, chewing on his bottom lip. Okay, let's see if we can at least pretend we know what we're doing. Pretending is my second favorite thing, Grix said, flashing a grin. Rhinan grinned back despite the danger. And you're first surviving, Grix replied, turning his attention back to the reactor. Good choice, Rhinan agreed. Together they delved back into the chaos of wires and circuits, each movement bringing them closer, hopefully, to some semblance of control over whatever nightmare they'd accidentally unleashed. As they worked, the universe continued its quiet laughter, watching with the bemused detachment only a multiverse could muster. So there they were, two unlikely heroes battling the whims of fate in an asteroid city that had seen better days. The stakes were high, the odds low, and the punchlines almost wrote themselves. You ever think we're the good guys? Grix asked suddenly, eyes fixed on a particularly troublesome fuse. Rhinan paused, considering. If we're the good guys, the universe is in deep trouble. Well, at least we're consistent, Grix replied, adjusting his grip on a spanner. Saves on surprises, Rhinan said, and I hate surprises, except when they involve not dying, Grix said with a wink. Rhinan laughed, the sound a little too wild, a little too close to hysteria. Yeah. I could do with a few more of those surprises. As they continued their work, the reactor's growl softened, like a beast slowly being brought to heel. But the glow remained, pulsating gently, a stubborn reminder that the universe wasn't done messing with them just yet. If we get through this, Grix said, drinks are on me. You better believe it, Rhinan replied. I'm going to drink enough to forget the universe exists. Cheers to that, Grix said, smiling. The reactor shuddered again, but this time it felt different. Less like the prelude to disaster and more like a reluctant concession to the inevitable. Rhinan and Grix exchanged a quick glance, their shared relief unspoken. Looks like we might actually live to see another grim, dystopian day, Rhinan said, wiping his hands on his pants. And here I thought we were out of luck, Grix replied, the sarcasm a comforting constant. Nah, we're just getting started, Rhinan said, turning back to the controls. The reactor finally settled into a steady hum, the air around them losing its electric tension. But even as they began to relax, both knew the score. Lithos City was still teetering on the edge, and that mysterious energy source was far from finished with them. You realize, Rhinan said, his voice low, that we've probably pissed off whatever cosmic entities are watching us. Grix shrugged. They can get in line, Rhinan snorted, shaking his head. Come on, let's at least pretend we know what's going on here. Pretend. My favorite game, Grix said, a mischievous glint in his eye. Rhinan chuckled, feeling a familiar warmth of camaraderie. All right, back to work. The multiverse is counting on us. That's the scariest thought I've had all day, Grix replied, picking up his tools. And with that, they got back to it, two men standing against the whims of fate, trading barbs and jokes as they fought to keep their city from crumbling into the void. The reactor room had finally stopped pulsating like a beast with indigestion, and Rhinan was just about ready to breathe a sigh of relief when the door slammed open. There stood Counselor Vexel, as grim-faced as a tax collector at a funeral, flanked by a pair of what could generously be described as security personnel. In reality, they looked like they'd lost a fight with a wardrobe, and were now trying to pass it off as a fashion statement. Vexel gazed around the chaos with an expression that suggested he was mildly impressed he hadn't ended up in a ditch, yet entirely prepared to blame someone else if he did. What the hell is going on here? He demanded, his voice as sharp as a freshly honed blade. Grix didn't bother looking up from the console. Just another day in paradise, Counselor. We're thinking of renaming the place Hellhole City. Got a nice ring to it. Rhinan wiped his sweaty palms on his jumpsuit and turned to face the Counselor. We've had a bit of a hiccup. Nothing major, just a temporary interdimensional rift. Temporary? Vexel's eyes narrowed, skepticism pouring off him in waves. You call ripping a hole in the fabric of reality temporary? Rhinan shrugged, trying for nonchalance and probably landing somewhere closer to oops. Well, it's not like anyone fell through it. Yet, Vexel ran a hand over his bald head, an action that seemed to be more about checking his scalp hadn't spontaneously combusted than anything else. The Council is concerned. The Council is always concerned, Grix muttered, still tapping away at the console. Mostly about things that don't matter. Rhinan shot him a look that said not helping and turned back to Vexel. We're getting it under control, Counselor. These things happen when you're dealing with a reactor older than most planets. Vexel fixed them both with a stare so cold it could have stopped global warming. Long as it doesn't happen again, the Council doesn't like surprises. Neither do we, Rhinan replied, his voice dripping with sarcasm. But when you're working with this junkyard of a city, surprises are as common as the Council's empty promises. You know, blaming us is really a group effort. Grix chimed in, finally looking up. Shouldn't just rest on our shoulders. The council will be watching, Vexel said, clearly deciding that arguing with two sarcastic engineers wasn't worth the effort. He turned on his heel and marched out, leaving a trail of frustration in his wake. The door clanged shut and silence fell over the room, save for the hum of the reactor. Think they bought it? Grix asked, a grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. Rhinan snorted. We could tell them the sky is falling and they'd ask for a weather report. A loud crackle interrupted their banter, the lights flickering like a dying bonfire. Rhinan and Grix exchanged a glance, the humor slipping from their faces. That didn't sound temporary, Grix said, moving closer to the panel as if proximity alone could tame the beast within. The multiverse isn't known for its patience, Rhinan replied. It's like a toddler with a loaded weapon, it'll pull the trigger eventually. They got back to work, hands moving in practiced coordination over the controls. It was an old dance, one they knew all too well, and the stakes were higher than ever. The reactor was like a petulant child, one that could combust at any moment and take out half the city with it. Maybe we should think about a career change, Grix said, the faux casual tone not quite hiding the tension in his voice. I hear asteroid mining is booming. Sure, and we could get blown to bits in a mining accident instead of a reactor meltdown. The variety would be nice, Rhinan replied. Besides, where's the fun in making sensible life choices? The air around them seemed to quiver, as if reality itself was having second thoughts about sticking around. They both cursed simultaneously, a chorus of colorful language that could have peeled paint off the walls. Whatever's causing this, it's not going to stop on its own, Grix said, his voice cutting through the electric haze. We need to stabilize the energy flow, Rhinan nodded, swallowing the dread that threatened to rise in his throat. Right, because if we don't, the universe is going to throw a fit that makes the Big Bang look like a firecracker. Their fingers flew over the controls, a flurry of movement that belied the chaos brewing beneath the surface. The reactor continued to pulse with a malicious energy, as if mocking their every attempt to control it. You ever feel like life's just one big cosmic joke? Grix asked, his voice barely audible over the hum of the machinery. All the time, Rhinan replied, and the punchlines always at our expense. The ground trembled beneath them, a reminder that time was not on their side. The anomalies were getting worse, the fabric of their reality stretching thinner with each passing second. We need to redirect the energy, Rhinan said, a plan forming in the chaos of his mind. If we can disperse it, sounds great. And how do we do that without blowing everything to hell? Grix asked, skepticism dripping from every word. Well, we start by not asking for directions from the council, Rhinan said, flashing a grin that was more bravado than anything else. Good plan, Grix replied, the sarcasm a veil over his own fear. Now, let's get to it before the universe decides to evict us. They set to work, their movements synchronized by years of practice and the desperation of the moment. The reactor groaned in protest, but Rhinan and Grix pressed on, determined to wrestle control back from the brink of oblivion. As they worked, the anomalies continued to play havoc with the world around them. Shadows flickered in the corners of their vision, and the air felt charged with 1,000 unsaid possibilities. You ever think about what's on the other side of those rifts? Grix asked, the question hanging between them like a forbidden fruit. All the time, Rhinan replied, his hands never stopping. But I've got enough problems on this side, thanks. The reactor's angry growl gradually softened, the tremors receding like a tide reluctantly leaving the shore. It was a tenuous peace, but one they would take willingly. Looks like we've bought ourselves a little time, Grix said, inspecting the readouts with a critical eye. For now, Rhinan replied, wiping sweat from his brow, but we still need a real solution. We'll figure it out, Grix said, clapping a hand on Rhinan's shoulder. We always do. Optimism, from you? Rhinan asked, raising an eyebrow. The universe must be spinning out. Hey, even I have my moments, Grix replied with a grin. Besides, it's not like things can get any worse. As if on cue, a distant rumble echoed through the city, reminding them that fate loved nothing better than proving people wrong. Well, I guess it can, Rhinan said, rolling his eyes. Thanks for jinxing it. Anytime, Grix replied, the banter a comforting constant. They moved back to the console, the chaos a steady companion at their side. Lithos City was far from safe, and the anomalies were still a looming threat. But for now, they had a handle on the situation, and that would have to be enough. Let's get this mess sorted before anyone else comes knocking, Rhinan said, pulling up the schematics for the reactor. Good idea, Grix replied, his eyes scanning the data. I'm not in the mood for another council visit. Together, they delved back into the maze of wires and circuits, their hands moving with a purpose that belied the uncertainty beneath. The reactor hummed softly, the glow now a gentle reminder of the chaos that lurked just beneath the surface. Despite the danger, they worked on, their banter a lifeline in the storm. The stakes were high, the odds long, but they had each other and a city to save. and if the universe was watching, it would have to wait its turn. The joke was on it, and Rhinan and Grix were the punchline. Rhinan leaned back from the console, his eyes scanning the readouts with all the enthusiasm of a man reading his own obituary. Beside him, Grix was poking at a stubborn wire like it had personally offended him. The reactor room's oppressive heat and complex tangle of pipes were almost comforting by now, like a dysfunctional family you couldn't wait to escape but were weirdly attached to. "Hey Grix, you ever wonder if this room is what hell looks like?" Rhinan asked. "Nah," Grix replied, not missing a beat. "Hell's probably got better air conditioning." They both chuckled, the sound echoing off the metal walls, absorbed by the constant hum of the reactor. For all their joking, though, they knew the gravity of their situation. Rhinan had a plan, or the beginnings of one anyway, and it was risky enough to make his palms sweat more than the heat in the room. "We need answers," Rhinan said, more to himself than Grix. "Real ones. Not the kind the council fobs off on us with a smile and a wave, right? Because trusting the government's always worked out so well," Grix replied, his tone as dry as a Martian desert. "What's the plan, fearless leader?" Rhinan rubbed his chin, as if trying to massage out an idea. "The archives. We need to dig into the city's past, see if anyone else managed to screw up this badly. There's got to be something useful buried in all that ancient data." Grix pulled a face. "The archives? You mean those dusty old files that haven't been touched since before my grandfather was a glint in his father's eye?" "Exactly. We're better to find out how not to handle a reactor than from the people who probably blew up half the city doing it." Grix sighed, pushing himself away from the console. "I knew I should have called in sick today." The archives were located in a part of Lithos City that could generously be described as quaint. Less generously, it was a graveyard of forgotten knowledge, a testament to humanity's ability to forget more than it learned. As Rhinan and Grix made their way through the dusty stacks, they joked that they were probably inhaling history, and likely some rare diseases too. "You know, I half expect to find a few skeletons tucked away in here," Grix said, squinting at a particularly ancient tome. "Wouldn't be surprised. The council's probably hoping we'll join them," Rhinan replied, flipping through a file with more notes than a student cramming for finals. The hours ticked by in a haze of yellowing documents and the occasional sneeze. They unearthed records of past multiverse interactions, scribbled notes of frantic engineers, and diagrams that looked more like a child's attempt at abstract art than anything useful. "Here," Rhinan said, waving a folder like it was a winning lottery ticket. "This might be it. Some engineer named Uden tried to stabilize the rifts years ago, and how'd that work out for him?" Grix asked, peering over Rhinan's shoulder. "Let's just say he didn't live to patent it," Rhinan replied, skimming the notes, "but looks like he had the right idea. If we recalibrate the energy flow, we might actually be able to control this mess." "Control it," Grix snorted. "I'll believe that when the reactor stops trying to kill us every other minute." With newfound determination and a healthy dose of skepticism, they headed back to the reactor room, eager to put their dubious plan to the test. They worked quickly, their hands a blur as wires were rerouted and power levels adjusted. The reactor's glow shifted from angry red to something resembling a sickly green, and Rhinan couldn't help but think it was an improvement, even if it looked like the color of expired gelatin. "You think this'll work?" Rhinan asked, his voice barely audible over the hum. "Who knows? We might just end up with a new color to add to the everything's gone wrong palette," Grix replied, watching the energy readings with a critical eye. With a shared nod, they initiated the recalibration. For a moment, everything held its breath. Then reality itself seemed to hiccup. The lights flickered wildly, shadows danced like panicked phantoms, and the air crackled with a sinister energy that set their teeth on edge. Rhinan," Grix said, his voice tense. "I think our adjustments just sent the anomalies into overdrive." "No kidding," Rhinan replied, trying to ignore the creeping sensation that they'd just poked a sleeping dragon. "Looks like Uden's plan wasn't as foolproof as we hoped." The reactor pulsed angrily, the energy within seeming to mock their efforts. It was as if the city itself was taunting them, daring them to try and control what should never have been meddled with. "Guess we're not getting that Employee of the Month award," Grix said, his attempt at humor doing little to mask the worry in his voice. Rhinan gritted his teeth. "We need to stabilize these fluctuations before they tear everything apart." "Sure, because that sounds easy, right?" Grix replied, his sarcasm almost comforting in its familiarity. The reactor protested with a series of ominous clangs, each one reverberating through the room like a death knell. Rhinan and Grix exchanged a glance, the silent communication of two people who'd been through too much together to bother with words. "Got any bright ideas?" Grix asked, desperation creeping into his tone. "Only one," Rhinan replied, swallowing hard. "We push the reactor to its limits, force it to reset the energy balance." Grix raised an eyebrow. "And if it blows, then we'll be too dead to care," Rhinan said with a grim chuckle. "Sounds like a plan," Grix replied, matching Rhinan's dark humor with his own. They dove back into the fray, tweaking controls, monitoring readings, and praying to whatever deities might be listening that their gamble would pay off. As the reactor's hum grew louder, the air thickened with the scent of ozone and something else, something that smelled suspiciously like failure. Almost there, Rhinan muttered, his fingers flying over the controls. Grix glanced at the readouts, his expression grim. We've got seconds before the whole thing goes critical. With a growl of determination, Rhinan slammed a final command into the console. The reactor roared in defiance, the energy within swirling like a caged beast. Then, with a jolt that nearly knocked them off their feet, the room was flooded with light. "It's holding," Grix said, disbelief coloring his words. For now, Rhinan replied, his voice shaking with adrenaline. They remained frozen, waiting for the other shoe to drop, but the reactor seemed to settle into a grudging equilibrium. The anomalies receded, the shadows returned to their rightful places, and the hum of the reactor softened to a steady thrum. "Well," Grix said, his voice carrying a note of astonishment. "Look at that. We're not dead, yet," Rhinan added, unable to resist one last jab at fate. They slumped against the nearest wall, exhaustion washing over them like a tidal wave. The city was still in one piece for the moment, and the anomalies were, at least temporarily, contained. "So what now?" Grix asked, his tone both weary and hopeful. "Now," Rhinan replied, "we figure out how to make this solution permanent." "Great," Grix said, rolling his eyes. "Another problem for another day, then." "Exactly," Rhinan replied with a tired smile. "For now, let's just enjoy the fact that we're still breathing." The silence that followed was almost comforting, broken only by the steady rhythm of the reactor. For all their struggles, for all the chaos that had nearly consumed them, they'd managed to keep their heads above water, at least for today. As the tension bled from their muscles, Rhinan allowed himself a rare moment of introspection. In a world that seemed determined to chew them up and spit them out, they'd managed to find a way to laugh in the face of adversity. Maybe that was the real victory, the ability to keep moving forward, even when the universe seemed intent on pulling the rug out from under them. "Hey, Grix," Rhinan said, his voice soft with the weight of the moment. "Yeah," Grix replied, his eyes half closed in the first semblance of peace he'd felt all day. "We might not be heroes, but we sure know how to survive," Rhinan said, his words laced with a mix of pride and resignation. Grix smirked, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "Survivors, huh? Not bad for a couple of guys who barely passed engineering school." They shared a laugh, the sound ringing out in the reactor room like a defiant anthem. For now, they'd survived the storm, and in the grimdark world of Litho City, that was more than most could claim. As they settled into a companionable silence, the reactor's hum continued its steady beat, a reminder that their work was far from over. But for the first time in what felt like forever, they allowed themselves to hope that maybe, just maybe, the punchline wasn't at their expense after all. Rhinan and Grix slowly peeled themselves off the wall, trying to muster some semblance of dignity after their near-death escapade. Their moment of relief, however, was about to be rudely interrupted by a new brand of chaos, one that seemed intent on proving that, indeed, things could always get worse. "Did you hear that?" Rhinan asked, cocking an ear toward the reactor room's entrance. "Hear what?" Grix replied, his voice a tired monotone. "All I hear is the blessed hum of not being dead." Rhinan squinted, straining against the dim lights. "That," he said, as the distant sound of alarms began to worm into their consciousness. "That lovely melody. You know, I didn't realize our situation needed a soundtrack of impending doom." Grix groaned. "Please tell me that's just the Council's way of announcing tea time. Never pegged you for such an optimist," Rhinan quipped, moving toward the door with all the enthusiasm of a man descending into a pit of hungry vipers. As they stepped into the hallway, the alarms grew louder, punctuated by the occasional crash and what sounded disturbingly like growls. Grix shot Rhinan a look that could have melted steel. "Growls?" Grix snapped. "Since when did we start sharing space with the world's angriest zoo?" "Must have missed the memo," Rhinan replied, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Maybe Ivo's gone and turned the archives into a petting zoo, or maybe," Grix mused, "he's just unleashed something he can't control." "Wouldn't be the first time, would it?" Rhinan chuckled darkly. "Good old Ivo. He always did have a knack for pouring fuel on a fire." As if on cue, a figure rounded the corner, tall, lean, and wearing a shit-eating grin that was practically trademarked. Ivo the opportunist extraordinaire had arrived. "Gentlemen," Ivo declared, spreading his arms wide as if he were welcoming them to a gala instead of a disaster. "I see you've managed to survive the latest round of How the Hell Are We Still Alive, Ivo," Rhinan said, his voice as flat as a dead planet. "To what do we owe the displeasure?" "Oh, you know," Ivo replied, waving a hand dismissively. "Just thought I'd drop by and see how my favorite troubleshooters are doing in these trying times." "Trying?" Grix scoffed, more like exhausting. "And you're not helping." Ivo feigned a look of innocence. "Me, I'm just here to offer my support. I mean, someone has to pick up the pieces after you two inevitably blow everything up. Is that what you're calling your little science project? Rhiannon asked, gesturing to the sounds of chaos echoing through the halls. Ivo's grin widened, a glint of mischief in his eyes. Oh, that. Just a little experiment in interdimensional diplomacy, and how's that working out for you? Grix inquired, his tone sharp enough to cut glass. Well, let's just say our friends from the other side are a bit temperamental, Ivo admitted, tilting his head as if listening for the latest crash. But nothing a little negotiation can't handle. Rhiannon rolled his eyes. Negotiation? I'm sure they're dying to hear your terms over tea and biscuits. Don't be so cynical, Rhiannon, Ivo chided. I've got everything under control. Oh, really? Because it sounds like your idea of control involves letting in every nasty from every reality we've never heard of. Grix shot back. Details, Ivo dismissed with a wave. The way I see it, we're on the cusp of a new era. An opportunity to expand our horizons, Rhiannon snorted, or to get our horizons eaten alive. But sure, let's call it expanding. Look, the multiverse is a rich tapestry. Grix cut him off with a groan. No tapestry talk. We don't do tapestries here. Ivo shrugged, unperturbed. Suit yourself. But think of what we can learn, the power we can harness. Rhiannon exchanged a look with Grix, their patience thinner than a sheet of graphene. Power, huh? Last I checked, the council wasn't too thrilled with surprises. The council, Ivo said, rolling his eyes with exaggerated disdain. Bureaucrats with the imagination of a cardboard box. They wouldn't know progress if it bit them. Progress is nice and all, Grix said, but how about we focus on not getting mauled by whatever the hell you've let loose? As if on cue the alarms seemed to intensify, punctuated by another unsettling crash. Rhiannon sighed, tapping his temple as if to stave off a headache. All right, Ivo, enough games. What's your angle here? Ivo's grin turned sly. Simple, really. With the reactor's anomalies, we've got a chance to bridge realities, a chance to harness energy beyond our wildest dreams, but someone's got to have the guts to seize it. And you think you're that someone? Rhiannon asked, skepticism dripping from his words. Better me than some council lackey with a clipboard and a checklist, Ivo replied. Or better you than us, Grix muttered under his breath. Look, you can help me or you can stay out of the way, Ivo said, his tone taking on a hard edge. But either way, I'm not backing down. There's too much at stake. Rhiannon shook his head. You always did let ambition blind you, Ivo. And you always did let caution hold you back, Ivo countered with a smirk. Fine, have your fun, Rhiannon said, throwing up his hands. But when your little science project starts tearing holes in reality, don't expect us to clean up your mess. Oh, I think you'll find you'll want to help, Ivo said, his voice a low, confident murmur, whether you like it or not. With that, Ivo turned on his heel and sauntered down the hallway, leaving Rhiannon and Grix to contemplate the fresh hell they'd just been dragged into. Why do I get the feeling we're going to end up regretting this? Grix asked, rubbing the back of his neck. Because we always end up regretting it, Rhiannon replied, a weary smile tugging at his lips. So what's the plan, oh fearless leader? Grix inquired, mimicking a salute. Rhiannon took a deep breath, his mind racing through the possibilities. Simple. We keep our heads down, figure out what Ivo's really up to, and make sure we don't get caught in the crossfire. Grix snorted. Sounds easy enough. Just another day in the life, right, Rhiannon replied, his voice lacking conviction. Let's just hope we get through it all with our skins intact. With that, they headed deeper into the bowels of Lithos City, the weight of their new mission pressing down on them like a leaden cloak. The city's corridors echoed with the distant sounds of discord, clashes and growls, and the eerie hum of a reactor teetering on the edge of madness. Think Ivo's right, Grix asked, as they navigated the labyrinthine passageways. About seizing the opportunity, Rhiannon shook his head. I think he's got more guts than brains. Always did. But that doesn't mean he's wrong about the potential. Just that he doesn't care about the cost. Sounds about right, Grix said, his voice tinged with resignation. Guess we'll just have to keep an eye on him. Agreed, Rhiannon replied, his mind already strategizing their next move. For now, let's focus on keeping these realities from crashing together. I've grown rather fond of existing in just one. They moved swiftly through the sprawling complex that was Lithos City, a place that somehow felt both vast and claustrophobic, like being trapped inside a mechanical beast whose insides were a tangle of rusted pipes and forgotten dreams. They passed groups of soldiers and scientists, all frantically trying to make sense of the chaos Ivo had gleefully unleashed. Do you think he even has a plan? Grix asked, sidestepping a technician who was muttering something about containment protocols. Not a complete one, Rhiannon replied, but that's never stopped him before. Ivo's always been more of a leap before you look kind of guy, which is why he's the one with a rival faction, and we're the ones stuck cleaning up, Grix said, his tone half amused, half exasperated. They continued on, the dim corridors a maze of identical metal walls and flickering lights. At times, Rhiannon felt like a lab rat in an experiment gone wildly out of hand, a rat with a sarcastic sidekick and a penchant for getting into trouble. So Grix said, breaking the silence, if we're going to keep tabs on Ivo, we're going to need intel. Any ideas, archives? Rhinan replied without hesitation. Ivo might be reckless, but he's not stupid. He would have left a paper trail somewhere. Grix raised an eyebrow. You want to go back there? After the whole possibly inhaling history thing, Rhinan shrugged. Better than inhaling whatever's in the air now. As they turned yet another corner, the sounds of the city's unrest continued to echo around them, a symphony of chaos that seemed to grow louder with every step. It was a grim reminder that they were dancing on the edge of a precipice, a misstep away from plunging into the abyss. Hey, look on the bright side, Grix said, his voice light despite the gravity of their situation. At least we're not bored. Rhinan couldn't help but chuckle, the sound tinged with irony. True, I've always said a little excitement is good for the soul. They reached the entrance to the archives, the door looming like the gateway to some ancient crypt. Dust motes drifted lazily in the air, catching the dim light in a way that made Rhinan think of old ghosts and forgotten secrets. All right, Grix said, cracking his knuckles. Let's see what our friend Ivo's been up to. They stepped inside, the familiar scent of aged paper and stale air greeting them like an old acquaintance. The archives stretched out before them, row after row of records and files, each one promising answers, or at least more questions. Okay, Rhinan said, taking a deep breath. Let's find out just how deep this rabbit hole goes. Grix shot him a grin, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of mischief and determination. Here's to hoping it doesn't lead to Wonderland. Together, they plunged into the archives, their footsteps echoing in the silence. As they sifted through the records, they kept one ear tuned to the distant sounds of chaos, a reminder that even as they worked to uncover the truth, the world outside was teetering on the brink of catastrophe. Hey, Rhinan, Grix said after a while, holding up a particularly dense folder. Found something interesting. Rhinan looked up, curiosity piqued. What is it? Grix tossed the folder onto the table, the contents spilling out like a dam bursting. Looks like Ivo's been busy making friends, or enemies depending on how you look at it. Rhinan sifted through the papers, his brow furrowing as he absorbed the information. These are correspondence logs between Ivo and some unknown entities, Grix nodded. Yeah, and check this out, mentions of energy manipulation, reality bridging, and oh, would you look at that, control protocols for multiverse interactions. Rhinan's eyes narrowed. He's trying to play God, more like a mad scientist with delusions of grandeur, Grix corrected. Same difference, Rhinan replied, shaking his head in disbelief. He's got no idea what he's messing with. Well, that's nothing new, Grix pointed out. But it means we've got an angle. Rhinan nodded, his expression grim. We need to stop him before he tears the city apart. Or worse, the fabric of reality itself. Just another day in paradise, Grix said with a wry smile. Just another day, Rhinan agreed, his voice steady with resolve. As they worked, the shadows in the archives seemed to lengthen, the weight of their task settling over them like a shroud. But beneath it all, there was a flicker of hope, a belief that, despite their as if the universe had a sick sense of humor, the alarms in Litho City blared louder than a banshee's wail. It was like the city's version of a siren's song, only instead of luring sailors to their doom, it reminded Rhinan and Grix that they were living on borrowed time. With the city's infrastructure groaning under the strain of Ivo's harebrained reality tinkering, Rhinan felt like a hamster on a wheel going nowhere fast. So what's our next brilliant move? Grix asked, dodging a loose ceiling panel that crashed to the floor, narrowly missing his toes. Because standing around in this archive is starting to feel like waiting for an executioner who's running late. Rhinan shot him a wry look. We regroup. Vexel's probably pulling out what little hair he has left trying to keep the council from imploding. We need to find him, figure out how he's planning to deal with Ivo's little science fair project. Grix snorted. Vexel's not exactly the let's hold hands and sing Kumbaya type. No, Rhinan agreed, gathering the papers back into their folder. But he's the only one who might have the clout to outmaneuver Ivo. And if he doesn't, well, I've always wanted to see what the end of the world looks like up close. As they exited the archives, the corridor lights flickered ominously, casting shadows that danced like phantoms. The air was thick with the tension of a city on the brink, where every creak and groan felt like a prelude to collapse. Think Vexel's got a plan? Grix asked, as they made their way through the labyrinthine corridors, each one a carbon copy of the last. Vexel always has a plan, Rhinan replied, his tone dripping with sarcasm. It's just that his plans usually involve us doing the heavy lifting while he sits safe behind a desk. Comforting, Grix said dryly. I love being the pawn in someone else's chess game. Their path was blocked by a group of frantic technicians, all babbling in a frantic symphony of jargon that made about as much sense as an ancient alien language. Containment breach and system failure were repeated with such frequency that Rhinan wondered if they were developing a new chant. Hey, Rhinan barked, cutting through the chaos. Where's Vexel? One of the technicians looked up, eyes wide with fear. Council chamber or what's left of it, he replied, gesturing wildly down the corridor. But good luck getting there. Place is a madhouse. Fantastic, Grix muttered. Just what I wanted to hear. As they pushed their way through the throng, the air crackled with the uneasy energy of a room full of people who knew they were hanging by a thread. It was a scene straight out of a disaster movie. Only this time, there was no Hollywood hero to save the day. Think Ivo's enjoying this? Grix asked, sidestepping another fallen piece of ceiling. If I know Ivo, he's probably watching it all from some vantage point with a bucket of popcorn, Rhinan replied. Chaos is his idea of opera. They finally reached the council chamber, or what was left of it. The place looked like a war zone, with overturned desks and shattered glass littering the floor. Councillor Vexil stood at the center, grim-faced and barking orders like a general losing a battle. Rhinan, Grix, Vexil's voice cut through the din like a knife. What's the situation? What's the situation? Rhinan echoed, disbelief coloring his tone. You mean aside from the fact that our reality's on the verge of a nervous breakdown, Vexil's expression was as unreadable as a poker player's. We need to stabilize the reactor. Ivo's pushed it too far this time. No kidding, Grix said. And here I thought things couldn't get worse. Always a pessimist, Grix, Vexil said, managing a ghost of a smile. But I need you two to help me. We have to stop Ivo before this city, this world, tears itself apart. Great. Sounds simple enough, Rhinan replied, his voice dripping with irony. Got any idea how we're supposed to do that? Vexil sighed, looking older than his years. I've got a few ideas. First, we need access to the control room. But it's not going to be easy. Ivo's locked it down tighter than a miser's vault. Let me guess, Grix said. You want us to be the ones to infiltrate it. Precisely, Vexil replied, his expression softening slightly. You're the only ones I trust to get it done. We're honored, Rhinan said dryly. Nothing like saving the universe to make a guy feel appreciated. With their mission set, Rhinan and Grix turned and headed towards the control room, the path ahead fraught with danger and uncertainty. It felt like walking into the mouth of a dragon, only this dragon had multiple heads and an appetite for destruction. So, how's our day looking now? Grix asked as they navigated through the chaos, the city around them continuing its slow descent into madness. Oh, you know, Rhinan replied with a shrug. Just another stroll through a collapsing city, trying to save it from a maniac who thinks he's playing Sim Universe. Best not to keep the universe waiting then, Grix said, his tone lighter than the situation warranted. They moved quickly, each step echoing with the urgency of their mission. As they neared the control room, the air grew hotter, the oppressive heat a reminder of the reactor's precarious state. Sweat trickled down their backs, but they pushed on, driven by necessity and a grim determination. Ivo really has done it this time, Rhinan said, shaking his head. Who knew his ambition would take us to the brink of annihilation? Grix chuckled darkly. Oh, come on, Rhinan. You've known him long enough to know that the brink is where he's most comfortable. They reached the control room, the door sealed tight like a tomb. Rhinan glanced at Grix, who nodded and set to work on the panel beside the door, his fingers moving with practiced precision. Think he left us a back door? Grix asked, his eyes focused on the task at hand. Knowing Ivo, he probably left us a dozen traps in a sarcastic note, Rhinan replied, leaning against the wall, eyes scanning for any sign of unwelcome surprises. The door hissed open, revealing the control room, a space that felt both sterile and chaotic, like a mad scientist's lab after a particularly bad day. After you, Grix said with a mock bow. Why, thank you, kind sir, Rhinan replied, stepping inside, his eyes taking in the array of consoles and screens, each one a testament to Ivo's dangerous genius. All right, he said, turning to Grix. Let's see if we can make sense of this mess. Grix joined him, the two of them working together to piece together the puzzle that was Ivo's handiwork. The screens flickered with data, each one a window into the chaos brewing at the heart of the reactor. Looks like he's trying to stabilize the rift, Grix said, tapping a screen that displayed a swirling mass of energy. But he's doing it the hard way, Rhinan grimaced. Typical Ivo, always opting for the dramatic. They worked quickly, their movements synchronized by years of practice. As they delved deeper into the system, it became clear that Ivo's plan was more complex and more dangerous than they had anticipated. We've got to override his control, Rhinan said, his fingers flying across the console. If we can shut down the reactor safely, we might be able to close the rift. And if we can't, Grix asked, his voice steady despite the weight of their task. Then we'd better hope we've got good life insurance, Rhinan replied, his tone darkly humorous, and maybe a backup plan for existence itself. The minutes stretched on, each one a heartbeat echoing through the silence of the room. Outside, the city continued its slow descent into chaos, a world teetering on the edge of oblivion. Rhinan, Grix said suddenly, his voice breaking the tense silence. I think I've got something. Rhinan looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. What is it? Grix pointed to a section of code on the screen, a complex series of algorithms that made Rhinan's head spin just looking at it. It's a backdoor. Ivo's built in a failsafe, just in case things went south. Ryanan's lips curved into a sardonic smile. So he did leave us a note. They worked furiously, their fingers dancing across the keyboards as they navigated the labyrinth of Ivo's creation. Bit by bit, they began to wrest control away from the man who had set this catastrophe in motion. Almost there, Ryanan said, his voice tight with concentration. Grix nodded, his own focus unbroken. Just a little more finally, with a triumphant beep, the console displayed the message they had been waiting for. Reactor stabilized. Rift closure initiated. They both let out a breath they hadn't realized they were holding. It was a small victory in a war that was far from over, but in that moment, it felt monumental. Think that did it? Grix asked, his gaze still fixed on the screen. Let's hope so, Ryanan replied, a wry smile playing on his lips. Otherwise, we might be looking at the world's shortest retirement plan. As they turned to leave, the reality of their situation settled over them like a shroud. They had managed to buy themselves and the city a temporary reprieve, but the battle was far from over. Guess we're not done yet, Grix said, his voice tinged with exhaustion and determination. No, Ryanan agreed, his own resolve hardening. But for now, we've got a fighting chance. With that, they left the control room behind, stepping back into the chaos of Lithos City. They were two men against the odds, fighting to save a world teetering on the brink of destruction. But despite the darkness around them, they knew one thing for certain. They weren't going down without a fight. Ryanan and Grix emerged from the control room, the chaos of Lithos City swirling around them like a drunken whirlwind. Pipes groaned, alarms wailed, and somewhere in the distance, it sounded like someone was playing the drums with a sledgehammer. Business as usual, really. You ever get the feeling we're stuck in a cosmic joke and the punchline is our lives? Grix asked, dodging a piece of metal that decided to detach itself from the ceiling at just the right moment. Every damn day, Ryanan replied, glancing at the reactor's status panel one last time. Despite all odds and perhaps a bit of dark magic, they had managed to stabilize the rift, for now. It was like trying to patch a sinking ship with duct tape, but at least they'd bought themselves a little time before everything went under. They made their way through the wreckage, their minds already racing ahead, planning their next move. The city was on the brink of falling apart, but Ryanan had an idea, a stupid, risky, dangerous idea that might just turn the tide. All right, hear me out, Ryanan began, glancing at Grix as they marched through the debris-littered corridor. We're looking at this energy all wrong. Everyone's trying to fight it, but what if we use it? Grix gave him a sideways look that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else than here, listening to this. Use it? You mean like harnessing a tornado to power your toaster? Exactly, Ryanan said, unfazed by the sarcasm. We can't control the chaos, but we might be able to redirect it, channel it into something useful. Sounds like a one-way ticket to the land of no return, Grix replied, though there was a flicker of interest beneath his skepticism. What's your plan? Ryanan stopped and gestured around them. Look at this city. It's a mess, but it's our mess. If we can get everyone on the same page, use the city's infrastructure to amplify and stabilize the energy, we might just pull this off. Great, Grix muttered sarcastically. So all we need to do is unite a city on the verge of imploding, manipulate a reality-bending energy source, and not die in the process. Easy peasy. Piece of cake, Ryanan agreed with a grin that was more bravado than confidence. Let's head to the archives. We need those ancient data files to figure out how to do this without blowing ourselves into a new dimension. They navigated through the labyrinthine corridors, sidestepping debris and the occasional panicked citizen. The archives lay at the heart of the city, a relic of times long past, and their best hope of making sense of the chaos around them. When they arrived, the archives were a scene of organized chaos, people rifling through ancient data tablets, analysts babbling incoherently, and more coffee cups than should be legal. Counselor Vexel was there, looking slightly less haggard than the last time they saw him, but only just. He noticed them and waved them over, his face a mixture of relief and concern. Ryanan, Grix, Vexel greeted them, his voice carrying a note of desperation. Please tell me you have good news. We stabilized the reactor, for now, Ryanan said, his tone casual, as if he hadn't just prevented a dimensional catastrophe. But we've got a plan to do more than just put a band-aid on this mess. Vexel raised an eyebrow. I'm listening, Ryanan laid out his idea, gesturing animatedly as he spoke. We need to harness the energy, not fight it. We use the city's infrastructure, power grids, communication relays, anything with a pulse, and amplify the energy's stabilizing properties. Vexel listened, his eyes narrowing with thought. It's risky. If it fails, we're screwed, Grix interjected helpfully. Not that we're not already halfway there, but, Ryanan continued, ignoring Grix's fatalism, if it works, we could stabilize the energy permanently, and maybe even find a way to use it to our advantage. Vexel considered this, his fingers tapping a thoughtful rhythm on the nearest desk. All right, he said finally, let's get everyone on this. We need technicians, engineers, anyone who knows how to plug a cable or hit a button. Great, Grix said, clapping his hands together. Let's rally the troops and save the city. Again, Rhiannon and Grix set to work, spreading the word throughout the archives. It was like trying to organize a flash mob in the middle of a riot, but slowly, people began to listen. Maybe it was desperation, maybe it was the faint hope that things could get better, but one by one, they started to fall in line. All right, team, Rhiannon announced to the gathered crowd, a motley crew of technicians, analysts, and a few people who just looked lost. We're going to turn this chaos into order, and maybe, just maybe, not die horribly in the process. The crowd responded with a mix of nervous laughter and grim resolve. It wasn't much, but it was enough. As the plans were set into motion, Grix sidled up to Rhiannon. You think this is actually going to work? Rhiannon shrugged, a half-smile on his lips. Honestly, I have no idea. But it's the best shot we've got. Reassuring, Grix replied, though his eyes held a glint of determination. Let's get to it then. They dove into the work, coordinating teams, deciphering ancient data, and generally trying not to let the insanity of their situation overwhelm them. The city was a living organism, each part vital to its survival, and they were about to perform a very unorthodox surgery. As they worked, Vexel approached, his expression more relaxed than it had been in days. You're doing good work, both of you, he said, placing a hand on Rhiannon's shoulder. Rhiannon nodded. We're doing what we can. Hopefully it'll be enough. Vexel smiled, a rare sight. I've got faith in you too. You're a pain in the ass, but you're the best we've got. Thanks for the vote of confidence, Grix replied dryly, though there was a hint of gratitude beneath the sarcasm. They continued their efforts, the ires blurring together in a whirlwind of activity and caffeine-fueled determination. Slowly but surely, the city began to rally, its citizens uniting behind a common goal. It was a sight to behold, a city on the brink of destruction coming together to save itself. It wasn't perfect, and it sure as hell wasn't pretty, but it was something. All right, Rhiannon said as they reached a critical juncture in their plan. Time to see if we're geniuses or idiots. Let's hope for the former, Grix replied, his fingers crossed in mock sincerity. With a final command, they initiated the sequence, the city's infrastructure buzzing to life. The energy coursed through the system, a wild, untamed force that threatened to tear everything apart. But then, something incredible happened. The energy began to stabilize, the chaotic waves smoothing into a steady rhythm. It was like watching a storm calm into a gentle breeze, a miracle born from desperation and human ingenuity. Rhiannon let out a breath, his heart pounding with adrenaline and relief. I can't believe it actually worked. Grix smirked, the tension in his shoulders easing. Guess that means we're geniuses after all. There was still a long road ahead, challenges to overcome, and a maniac named Ivo to deal with, but for the first time it felt like they had a fighting chance. As the city settled into a new, tenuous equilibrium, Rhiannon and Grix stood together, partners in the madness that was their world. They'd faced the chaos and emerged victorious, if only for a moment. And in that moment they were invincible. So, Grix said, looking out over the city, what's next? Rhiannon grinned, a spark of mischief in his eyes. We find Ivo and give him a piece of our minds, preferably delivered with a side of knuckle sandwich. Sounds like a plan, Grix replied, his own grin matching Rhiannon's. Let's go find that bastard and show him what happens when you mess with Lithos City. With renewed determination, they set off, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. They were two men in a world gone mad, but they were far from finished. And as they walked into the chaos, they knew one thing for certain: they weren't going down without a fight. The plan, such as it was, hinged on unpredictability, something Lithos City had in spades. Chaos was its natural state, after all. The city was like a drunk playing Jenga. Everything seemed one breath away from collapse at all times. But today, Rhiannon and Grix had a plan to make that a weapon. Got your dancing shoes on? Rhiannon asked, voice rising above the cacophony of frantic technicians and groaning metal. He was half serious, half making it up as he went along, which seemed par for the course. Grix shot him a look that could peel paint. Course, and my funeral suit just in case. Optimism, Grix, it's the spice of life. If the spice is cyanide, Grix replied dryly. As they moved through the narrow corridors, the city groaned and trembled under the strain of its own existence, adding a percussion section to the symphony of chaos. Counselor Vexel had rallied what engineers and technicians he could find, but the task was akin to assembling a napping toddler's puzzle after a night on the sauce. All right, listen up, Rhiannon called out to the gathered team, the ragtag collection of the city's best only hope. We're gonna flip this city on its head, use the chaos energy, weaponize it. Think of it like yelling at a tornado until it changes direction, or gets mad and throws a cow at you, Grix added, to a smattering of nervous chuckles. Vexel stood nearby, looking marginally more composed than he had any right to be. The plan is unconventional, he said, choosing his words like they might bite him. But it might just work. Go team, someone muttered half-heartedly. Rhinan took a deep breath. All right, we're going to redirect the energy, channel it through the city's infrastructure. If we've done our math right, and if we haven't, Grix interjected. If we haven't, we're going to have the most interesting funeral this city's ever seen, Rhinan finished, smirking. Let's get to work. They split up, each taking a part of the city to prepare for the mad gambit. Rhinan was in charge of the west side grid, a patchwork of cables and circuits that barely functioned on a good day. Grix took the east, where the power lines were more rumor than reality. As Rhinan worked, splicing cables and muttering imprecations at uncooperative technology, he couldn't help but marvel at the sheer absurdity of their task. They were trying to tame chaos, harness it, because what else could they do? Fighting it hadn't worked, and they were fresh out of better ideas. How's it going over there? Grix's voice crackled over the comms, punctuated by the sound of something heavy clattering to the floor. Rhinan grunted as he twisted a particularly stubborn wire into place, like trying to knit a sweater out of barbed wire. About the same. Got a couple of engineers trying to turn a radio into a stabilizer. Beats me how, but they're confident. Confidence is good. Let's hope it's contagious. As if on cue, an alarm blared, a shrill, ear-piercing wail that Rhinan had come to associate with imminent doom. What now? He muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. Rifts expanding, came the panicked shout from a nearby tech. It's gonna overflow any second. Perfect timing, Rhinan snarled, more to himself than anyone else. All right, folks, this is it. Throw the switch on my mark. The city buzzed with tension, a live wire ready to snap. Rhinan could feel the energy building, a tangible force that tickled the air and raised the hairs on his arms. It was like standing in the eye of a storm, waiting for the inevitable. 3, 2, 1 now. With a collective breath held, they flipped the switches, rerouting the chaos energy through the city's infrastructure. It was a desperate gamble, a high-stakes game with the city's survival hanging in the balance. The effect was immediate and spectacular. The energy surged through the grids and circuits, a wild, freewheeling force that should have torn everything apart. But as it coursed through the city, something incredible happened. It began to stabilize. The chaotic waves smoothed out, the rift's edges knitting together like a wound finally healing. It was unbelievable, impossible, and yet there it was, playing out before their disbelieving eyes. We did it, Rhinan breathed, half in awe, half in disbelief. We actually did it. Grix's laughter crackled over the comms, a sound of pure, unadulterated relief. I'll be damned. Guess we're not as stupid as we look. Speak for yourself, Rhinan shot back, grinning despite himself. But no sooner had their victory sunk in than a new problem reared its head. The energy stabilized, yes, but it had to go somewhere. Like a river finding a new course, it surged towards the city's outskirts, where Ivo had been playing his reckless games with interdimensional forces. Look sharp, people, Vexel's voice barked over the comms. Ivo's pet projects are drawing the energy like flies to a carcass. Time to pay our old friend a visit, Rhinan said, already moving. Grix, meet me at the southeast quadrant. We've got a reckoning overdue. On my way. Let's make this bastard regret ever messing with Litho City. They navigated through the city's winding corridors, each step fueled by adrenaline and the high of their recent success. The city was holding for now, but the real test lay ahead. Facing Ivo was like wrestling a bear with a toothache, dangerous, unpredictable, and likely to end in pain. As they reached the quadrant, they could see the telltale signs of Ivo's handiwork, reality itself warping at the edges, threatening to spill over into something far less friendly. Ivo stood in the center of the chaos, a figure of madness and ambition, looking for all the world like a deranged conductor orchestrating a symphony only he could hear. Rhinan, Grix, Ivo's voice cut through the clamor, a note of glee tinging his words. Come to join the show, it's quite the spectacle. Yeah, about that, Rhinan shouted back. We were thinking of revising your script. Less reality bending, more reality not imploding. Ivo laughed, a sound that made Rhinan's skin crawl. Oh my dear Rhinan, you still don't see, do you? The chaos is a gift, a chance to transcend this mundane existence, or kill us all trying, Grix snapped, his patience as thin as a politician's promise. How about we skip the transcendence and settle for not being vaporized today? The energy crackled around them, growing more unstable with every passing moment. Rhinan could feel it, a storm building, ready to unleash hell unless they acted fast. All right, genius, he called to Ivo. You've got two choices, shut it down or we'll do it for you. And trust me, our method's not going to be gentle. Ivo hesitated, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. He was caught between his dreams and the stark reality of the situation, a reality that could very well end with him being the last madman standing in a pile of rubble. Fine, he spat, his defiance tinged with resignation. But mark my words, Rhinan, this isn't over. Not by a long shot, Rhinan agreed. But let's live to fight another day, yeah. Together, they worked to stabilize the energy, channeling it away from the edges of reality and into the city's systems. It was a delicate dance, one misstep away from disaster, but with each action, the chaos lessened, until finally, it was nothing more than a whisper. As the dust settled, Rynan and Grix looked at each other, a shared grin acknowledging the insanity of what they'd just pulled off. They'd faced the storm and come out the other side, battered but unbroken. "You know," Grix said, shaking his head, "if this keeps up, I might just get used to saving the world." "Don't," Rynan replied, clapping a hand on his shoulder. "It'll only encourage them." They turned back towards the heart of the city, where the citizens of Lithos were emerging from their shelters, cautious but hopeful. For the first time in a long time, there was a sense of unity, a shared purpose that transcended their usual bickering and infighting. Vexil joined them, looking remarkably human for a politician. "I have to hand it to you too," he said, nodding with something approaching genuine admiration. "I've seen miracles before, but that was something else." "It wasn't a miracle," Rynan replied, a wry smile playing on his lips. "Just good old-fashioned human ingenuity. Well, that and a healthy dose of insanity. Whatever it was, it worked," Vexil said. "And the city owes you both a debt." "Don't worry," Grix said. "We plan to collect, starting with a hot meal and a cold drink." As they walked through the streets, the city slowly came to life around them. It wasn't perfect, and there were still challenges to face, but for now they'd won a hard-fought battle, and that was enough. "Hey, Rynan," Grix said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "Think we'll ever get a quiet day?" Rynan laughed, a sound of pure, unrestrained joy. "Not in this lifetime, my friend, but who'd want it any other way?" With that, they walked on, partners against the chaos, ready for whatever fresh madness the universe had in store. Because in Lithos City, the only certainty was uncertainty, and Rynan and Grix wouldn't have it any other way. The dust was still settling in Lithos City, both literally and figuratively. Buildings groaned as they regained their composure, like an old man getting out of bed too quickly. Citizens were crawling out from their makeshift bunkers, blinking up at the occasional blue sky, peeking through the persistent smog, like it was some long-lost friend who'd finally returned from a bender. Rynan and Grix navigated the debris-strewn streets, a pair of unlikely heroes in a city that seemed to specialize in unlikely everything. The air was thick with the scent of burning circuits and fried optimism, but it was still air, breathable and mostly untainted by whatever new hell Ivo had been cooking up. "You know, I always thought if we ever saved the city, there'd be more confetti," Grix remarked, sidestepping a puddle of something that looked decidedly alive, or at least a parade. Rynan snorted. "Parades are for places that can afford straight lines. Here, we just end up walking in circles and calling it progress." He was right, of course. Lithos wasn't the kind of city that did anything the easy way. It was a place of twisted alleys and crooked smiles, where the only constant was change, and not the kind that ever made you richer. As they weaved through the chaos, they could see people beginning to pick up the pieces, both metaphorically and literally. There was a certain resilience in the air, a stubbornness that was uniquely human. It was as if the city had collectively decided that whatever the multiverse threw at them next, they'd at least be standing upright when it hit. Councillor Vexil, the very image of a politician trying to appear relatable, was addressing a small crowd near the heart of the city. He wore the kind of expression that suggested he was about to promise the rebuilding of Rome in a day. "People of Lithos," Vexil began, his voice carrying with the practiced ease of a man who spent his life speaking without saying much. "Today, we stand on the brink of a new era. Thanks to the courage and ingenuity of individuals like Rynan and Grix, we have not only survived, but we have thrived." Rynan leaned over to Grix, muttering under his breath. "I'd feel more heroic if my boots weren't squelching with something I'm afraid to identify." "Look on the bright side," Grix replied dryly. "At least we're not the ones who have to explain the power bill to the council." The crowd around Vexil was an odd mix of admiration and skepticism. They'd seen too many promises melt away like sugar in the rain. But for now there was hope, and hope was a currency of its own in Lithos City. "And with this victory," Vexil continued, warming to his theme like a chef with one good recipe, "we've shown the multiverse that Lithos will not be cowed. We will rebuild stronger and better than before." "Do you think he actually believes that?" Grix asked, not bothering to hide his skepticism. "Hard to say," Rynan shrugged. "But it's a nice sentiment, and as long as it keeps people from rioting, I'll take it." As the impromptu rally wound down, Vexil made his way over to the pair, his smile as fixed as a star in the sky. "Ah, Rynan, Grix, our saviors of the Ior, I trust you're ready to be hailed as heroes." "Heroes, huh?" Rynan echoed, cocking an eyebrow. "Does that come with dental?" Vexil chuckled like a man who'd heard the joke but never quite got the punchline. "Let's just say your contributions won't go unnoticed. The city owes you a great debt." "Yeah, well," Grix said with a wry grin, "we're not much for debts. But if you've got a cold beer and a hot meal, we might just call it even." Vexel nodded, all too eager to avoid the details that came with owing anyone anything in Lithos. Consider it done. We'll have a proper celebration once the city's stabilized. Celebration? Rhiannon mused. You sure we should be tempting fate like that? Last time we celebrated anything, half the infrastructure decided to throw a tantrum. True to form, Lithos City itself seemed to shudder at the idea of peace. Out on the fringes, the chaos still simmered, a reminder that while one crisis had been averted, there were a dozen more lurking in the wings. For now, the city was learning to embrace that chaos, wielding it like a shield against whatever fresh hell the universe might cook up next. As the days passed, Rhiannon and Grix found themselves thrust into roles they'd never aspired to, leaders of a sort. People looked to them for guidance, for answers, for the kind of savviness that came from pulling off the impossible and making it look like an afternoon stroll. Just when you think you've got the universe figured out, Rhiannon observed one evening, it throws another curveball. Hey, we're still here, Grix pointed out. That's more than we could say before. The city was a living thing, a beast that had weathered countless storms, and it was learning that its chaos was not a curse but a weapon, a defense against the predatory gaze of the multiverse. It was a city that had found strength in its own madness, and it was thriving in its own peculiar way. Rhiannon and Grix walked through the revitalized streets, feeling the pulse of life returning to a place that had danced so close to destruction. Shops were reopening, the hum of industry resumed, and in the air was a sense of collective defiance. Lithos was a city of survivors, after all. You know, Rhiannon said, breaking a comfortable silence, I think we might just be getting the hang of this. Don't get too comfortable, Grix warned. Comfort is just a prelude to complacency, and complacency in Lithos is a one-way ticket to a very small, very explosive room. Rhiannon chuckled, the sound laced with the kind of camaraderie that only came from shared near-death experiences. Well, at least we've got each other. Grix nodded, his expression softening in the twilight. Yeah, and I guess that's not nothing. They continued their walk, partners in chaos, their footsteps a steady rhythm against the backdrop of a city that was, once again, defying the odds. Lithos wasn't just surviving, it was thriving in its own chaotic way. Days turned into weeks, and the city was on the mend. New technologies sprouted like weeds in a garden, and the people adapted, as humans tend to do. Rhiannon and Grix became reluctant symbols of the city's resilience, their story woven into the fabric of Lithos lore, proof that even in the darkest times there was hope. Hey, you two, a voice called out from the bustling marketplace, pulling them from their thoughts. It was Counselor Vexel, looking rather pleased with himself. You're just in time. We're unveiling the city's new energy grid tomorrow, thanks to your, innovative approach. Let me guess, Rhiannon said with a grin. You're naming it after us. Vexel's smile faltered for just a moment before he recovered. Well, not exactly, but there will be a plaque. A plaque, Grix deadpanned. I'll try to contain my enthusiasm. Vexel laughed, though it was hard to tell if it was genuine or just a reflex. Trust me, it's a small token of our gratitude. Small is right, Rhiannon muttered, but he was smiling all the same. The unveiling was as grand as Lithos could manage, which was to say it was mostly organized chaos. People gathered in the square, a ragtag assembly of citizens who'd seen too much but were still willing to believe in something better, even if that something was just a few less power outages and a bit more stability. As Vexel took to the makeshift podium, there was a ripple of expectant silence. Friends of Lithos, he began, his voice carrying over the crowd with the authority of someone who knew how to command a room. Today, we take another step forward, not just in rebuilding, but in redefining who we are. This new energy grid is more than technology. It's a testament to our resilience, our ingenuity, and our refusal to be consumed by chaos. Rhiannon and Grix stood near the back, watching the proceedings with a blend of pride and disbelief. They'd been part of something much bigger than themselves, and that was a feeling that was hard to shake. As the ceremony concluded, the city buzzed with a newfound optimism. People milled about, discussing plans for the future, dreams of a better life. Even in a place as unpredictable as Lithos, there was hope, a fragile, beautiful thing that shone brightest in the darkest of times. Well, Grix said, turning to Rhiannon, looks like we did it. Again, Rhiannon nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon where the sun was setting in a blaze of oranges and reds. Yeah. For now, anyway, they stood there, side by side, two figures in a city that had become a part of them as much as they'd become a part of it. And they knew, in that unspoken way that only true friends do, that whatever chaos the future held, they'd face it together. To the next adventure, Grix proposed, clinking an imaginary glass. To the next adventure, Rhiannon agreed, his voice filled with the kind of hope that could only exist in the aftermath of survival. And with that, they stepped forward, ready to face whatever the multiverse had in store. Because in Lithos City, the only constant was change, and Rhiannon and Grix wouldn't have it any other way.